While it's quite certain that a large percentage of people have heard of opium, you might be among that percentage. What exactly do you know about it? That it's a drug? That it has been banned? Or the addiction problems many have been battling with? Well, enough questions. Let's get to it. Opium is an addictive narcotic drug, and it is the source of various other drugs like codeine, morphine, and heroin. It is obtained from the opium poppy plant, and it is generally known for its use as a painkiller, and sadly, opium poppy, though a natural plant, has been the root of several disasters. Fierce opium wars were fought around the beginning of the 19th century. The cause of the Opium Wars can be traced to trade disputes between the Qing dynasty and Western powers, particularly Great Britain, in the mid-19th century. The First Opium War was fought in 1839 to 1842, and it was between the Chinese Qing dynasty and Britain. What led to the war? The Qing Empire/dynasty wanted Britain merchants to stop selling opium to Chinese merchants. Before this, both the European and the Chinese enjoyed trading rights with each other. China was selling porcelain, silks, and tea, while the British used the profits from the sale of opium to purchase these Chinese luxury goods, which were in great demand in the West. At this point in time, the use of opium was already expanding from its medicinal purposes to usage as a recreational drug. It was addictive as a recreational drug, and so its demand soared. The Qing government, trying to curb the spread, as it was causing both social and economic disruptions, declared a ban on its sale, and a deadline was called for the destruction of all products of the Chinese soil. At first, though, opium was declared to be illegal, but smugglers still continued to distribute the drugs. In fact, it can be said that the illegal opium trade soared more than when it was legal. The High Commissioner was then ordered by the Emperor to end the trade. Several quantities of opium were destroyed in this attempt to stop the trade, with a large percentage belonging to British traders. A war, the First Opium War, then ensued, with Britain trying to get financial reparations from its loss and China still trying to prevent the trade and punishing offenders. With Britain having a better military and technology, it was only a matter of time before they won the war, and then they could force the hand of the Chinese government. With trading rights restored and Britain having the status of most favored nation, trade went on between the two nations. Other nations like France also got the same concessions. Among other things, 5 trading ports were ceded to Britain, and the financial reparations sought for was also paid. Okay, let us move to the Second War. Now, you should know that despite lifting the restrictions on trade, trading in opium was still illegal in China. The Second War was between the Qing Empire on one side and Britain and France on the other side. The British wanted the privilege of the treaties China signed with France and the United States. More than what they were able to get with the First War, they wanted all of China to be open to merchants, legalization of the opium trade, a British embassy in Beijing, foreign imports to be exempt from internal tax duties, the stifling of piracy, cheap labor, and the English version of treaties to take precedence over the Chinese version. China refused to negotiate with any of the countries, which angered the Western countries. The war, fought from 1856 to 1860, resulted in another treaty that compelled the Chinese to pay reparations for the expenses of the recent war, opened 10 ports to European commerce, legalized the opium trade, and grant foreign traders the right to travel within China. After a second phase of fighting, the treaty was confirmed in 1860. Now, you should know that it was not everyone in Great Britain who agreed with the trade in the war. There were arguments in the British Parliament, with some members calling for an end to the war. In each war, the foreign powers, i.e. the British and the French, won the wars because of their military technology. Their victory opened a wider door for commercial privileges and legal and territorial concessions in China. This was because the Qing government was compelled to grant tariffs that favored the European, trade concessions, and territory to the Europeans. However, the opium trade was still not legalized. But then, how did the opium trade even start, and why was China a major player in the trade? Though nobody can really trace the history of opium poppy, opium was first introduced to China by traders from Turk and Arab nations sometime around the 7th century. Then it was taken orally to relieve tension and pain. It was only available and was used in limited quantities until the 17th century. Wondering what changed? It was the practice of smoking tobacco that spread from North America to China, and opium smoking soon became popular throughout the country. This led to people getting addicted to opium and higher demand for it. Now you know that when it became a problem, the emperor banned its sales and smoking. But this didn't work. Opium smoking and addiction remained a problem in China during the subsequent decades. However, since the weakened Central Republican government could not wipe out the native cultivation of opium. As a matter of fact, the defeat of China in the opium was one of the factors that led to the fall of Qing dynasty, as it was perceived as weak for losing the war. Opium smoking was finally eradicated by the Chinese communists after they came to power in 1949. Why did Great Britain engage in the opium trade? Great Britain, as well as other European nations, engaged in the opium trade because of an imbalance in their balance of trade with China. The silks, porcelains, and teas from China were in great demand, and China was only accepting silver and gold in exchange. This led to a great imbalance as Britain couldn't really find a market for their own expected products. The British then devised a means of selling opium to Chinese merchants, and with the proceeds, bought Chinese luxury goods. What was left of the opium trade in China? By 1906, however, the importance of opium in the West's trade with China had declined, and the Qing government was able to begin to regulate the importation and consumption of the drug. In 1907, China signed the 10 Years Agreement with India, whereby China agreed to forbid native cultivation and consumption of opium on the understanding that the export of Indian opium would decline in proportion and cease completely in 10 years. The trade was thus almost completely stopped by 1917. The opium trade today. Today, the opium trade can be said to be almost non-existent if one were looking only at government policies and not considering the real situation of things, especially in the black markets. While it might be non-existent and not thriving in some parts of the world, the attention of the world is now being drawn to the global Afghan opium trade with another opium war traced to it. This time, the war, described as the longest war of the United States of America, is still being fought between the United States of America and Britain on one side and Afghanistan. And this will lead to the discussion on one of the major uses of opium: heroin. Heroin and the opium trade today. Heroin, called several names like brown sugar, H, horse, junk, skag, skunk, smack, white horse, is the most dangerous recreational drug in the world today. It is made from morphine, and morphine is obtained from opioid. The United States of America, probably above all others, has for several years been dealing with the consequences of severe addiction to heroin and has ever since then been fighting against the sales and trafficking of opium. In fact, opioid overdoses rank high on the list of the leading causes of death in the U.S. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Trade had described the Afghan opiate trade as being a source of a severe global threat to public health, governance, and security. The explosion of the trade in Afghanistan can be traced to security issues in the country and neighboring countries, as well as a prevalence of organized crime. The trade has expanded so much, although growing opium is a very serious crime in Afghanistan that is punishable with death. Afghanistan is also currently the largest producer of opium in the world. Other uses of opium today. Apart from its use as heroin, opium is still being used for medicinal purposes, though the growth of the opium poppy plant has been limited. Throughout history, opium has been used as a base for the opiate class of drugs used to suppress the central nervous system. Morphine, codeine, and thebaine are examples of drugs made from opiates, and they have been known to be very effective with spinal cord injuries and relieving pain in the brain. However, it is important that it is not used without a doctor's prescription and guidance, and it has side effects like sleepiness, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, rash, constipation, physical dependence, and respiratory depression. In fact, physical dependence and addiction are some of the clinical concerns that may prevent medical practitioners from prescribing it. As to the cultivation, in countries where it is allowed, only licensed companies are allowed to cultivate opium poppy, and it must be for medical and scientific needs. Effects of opium. Other than the side effects of using opium-based drugs, the use of opium in other forms, mostly as a recreational drug, has been known to have dangerous effects on the users. America is still dealing with the effects today. Getting addicted to heroin is one of the worst things that can happen to a person, and so it shouldn't even be tested, as it only takes 2 uses to be addicted. It has really been an interesting journey today, learning about the Opium Wars and the Opium Trade. What new thing did you learn? What did you think we left out? Please drop them in the comments section, and don't forget to like this video. Also, subscribe to this YouTube channel so as not to miss the next interesting and educational video. See you next time.